1st of March 2024 sees the second part of Denis Villeneuve's Dune sequence. The first film, which was released 3 years ago, rightly received great acclaim. And I'm not going to repeat this time round the superlatives you're going to read in reviews on the second film. If you enjoyed the first film, the second film is as intriguing and as encompassing and engrossing as the first. If you are looking at one of the seminal shifts in science fiction writing with Frank Herbert's Dune in 1965, what you have with the two films is a storytelling process which really drives down to the ecological nature of the discussion. This is a story about ecologies and what humans take from them. So you can very confidently go and see the second movie if you enjoyed the first one. What I want to talk about is the change in tone between the two films. And I think this is important because the first film largely can be seen about the fall of an empire. In this case, the destruction of House Atreides. Paul Atreides, one of the few survivors of the massacre on Arrakis, Dune, the titular planet of the novel, becomes part of the indigenous Fremen community and fights the Harkonnens. So the first part of the two films is really about the destruction of old empires. The second part, very clearly and very focusedly, is talking about the rise of a very different type of empire. Now, if you go back to the original novel, Frank Herbert already uses the term jihad, not a common term in the 1960s, and one we are more familiar with from the 1990s onwards. But he uses it way back in the past. These films are set over 8,000 years in the future. And the first jihad is the Butlerian jihad, which leads to an eradication of thinking machines. And that's quite important for this novel, for these films, and perhaps has not been brought to the fore quite as you would expect in the films itself. There was a war across galaxies against computers and thinking machines that had made humans subservient. And our modern age, that is something you might want to think about, as everyone seems to have their Star Trek communicator glued to their hand. So we more commonly call them our smartphones, but we are becoming increasingly dependent on the technology. And with the rise of AI and various people worried about what that might do, the fact that Frank Herbert in the novels foreshadowed this, and almost as a footnote, it's mentioned 4 or 5 times with no detail in the novel. Okay? The reason I say this is that this is a film largely about humans using their potential, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. And what we see is very much a near medieval portrayal of the commitment of a people to rid themselves of oppressors. The technology has got to the point where if you have a body shield, then it is only the slow blade that can penetrate it. Fast bullets bounce off. So suddenly we're going back to medieval warfare with swords and knives. So technology is definitely part of the film. But what we are seeing is the rise of religious fervor, and it is the key and central focus of the second film. And it is very well done. The acting is to the same quality as in the first movie, but I will point out that if you watch the film, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, and particularly Christopher Walken, for what is a serious drama, turn in excellent performances, and particularly Christopher Walken, because it is understated. It does not have his usual flourishes of excess and madness. It is perfect in the context of the way that the director has put this film together. So it is the rise of a religious empire on Arrakis, on Dune, and at the end of the movie, the beginnings of it beginning to impinge upon the entire galaxy. I think it's also worth considering what the novel Dune is actually about. And I would distill it down to two main points. It is a very complex, it is a very layered novel. And to a certain degree, in the second film, Denis Villeneuve has decided to concentrate on only one of those in any detail, and that is the commitment of the Fremen to follow Paul Muad'Dib Yusul Atreides as what they see as the Messiah. So the very positive part of the novel, and it comes through very much in the film in the films to a degree, is the perfectibility of humanity. In the absence of many common science fiction tropes, computers, robots, a whole range of things that we come to expect, it is the humans who have conquered the universe. But that aspect of it is not really to the fore in the films. In the first film, the Suk doctors make a brief appearance, as do the mentats. So the conditioning of medical professionals to do no harm and to be unimpeachable is actually challenged in the film. Okay? It's also challenged in the novel a great deal. But the mencaps are incredibly central to the overall arc, because if there are no computers, through training and discipline, humans have learnt how to process that information as if they are. And the mentats are basically human computers. And in the second film, they're largely absent. Okay? Almost completely absent in both films are the guild navigators. It is never explained how a society, a global empire, a galactic empire can travel faster than light in an instant. And in the novel, one of the really key parts of the story, which is only touched on lightly in what we see in the films, is the fact that humans exposed to massive doses of the spice melange, bathed in atmospheres where they breathe in the melange as much as air, gives them a sense of presence, so they can actually fold space and navigate past the stars, the black holes, and the other obstacles which would make space travel impossible. So a lot of the film is about the idea that spice and drugs more generally, given the 1960s, can enhance human possibilities. And it really isn't explored in the films. And I think it's probably the most interesting part of what we're actually seeing in the novels. You don't need the technology. So it's one of the reasons that with the ecological aspect of it and the absence of computers, some people describe this as a psychological science fiction novel, or the first, if you like, soft space opera, rather than one which is very much looking at technology. Technology is definitely part of the film, but it is always subservient to human use. And I think possibly there is a trick being missed by not emphasizing this. It is not purely in terms of religious fervor. It is actually in terms of how humans can work without it. So that would be a positive part of it. But Frank Herbert was also very, very clear that there's a strong negative aspect of the novel. And I guess it can be summed up in be careful what you wish for. The Bene Gesserit, the religious group of women who have manipulated the breeding lines. So this is animal husbandry. It's not quite eugenics, but it's creating a messiah. And the flip in the novel is that Lady Jessica breaks her instructions from the Bene Gesserit and gives Duke Leto a son when she was told only to bear him daughters. As far as the Bene Gesserit was concerned, their messiah was one generation off. So the Bene Gesserit had been manipulating how various members of the great houses would marry and breed to perfect a human being that would have control. And they wanted to be able to control this messiah. So Frank Herbert was very clear. Be careful about following charismatic leaders. In the series of novels he wrote, Paul Atreides and his children take the universe in a very different direction from peace and harmony. And what I would say with the second film, which is really very clear to this, is that Paul Atreides, towards the end, realizes that to beat the brutal, monstrous Harkonnens, he has to adopt their tactics. He has to become the monster that they are to defeat them. And in the novel and the subsequent novel, that unleashes a fervency in the Fremen that they are correct, that they are following their messianic leader, and that they can conquer every world, which ultimately is what happens in the series of novels. So there's a salutary tale there. It is well brought out to a degree in the second film, whereas if you compare the 1984 version of Dune, put together by David Lynch, I think it was his second film, one of the things which is largely missing from Dune Part 2 is the sense of weirdness that Frank Herbert embedded in the novels. Now, David Lynch's Dune was deeply flawed, but that was largely because the editing process was taken away from him at the end. But there are aspects of things I have talked to you about, including the Spacer Guild, the Navigators, as I said, the Mencaps, the Soup Doctors, and to a certain degree, it is made more explicit and is particularly unpalatable. So it is alluded to in the new film, that Baron Vladimir Harkonnen kills for pleasure and out of frustration. In the 1984 film, Baron Harkonnen and the Flower Boy was seen by some critics as the most homophobic cinematic statement of the time. That's not really what David Lynch was aiming at. In the novel, Baron Harkonnen has a propensity for young men. Okay? But it is gruesome. It is horrible to watch in the original film. And actually, I think the subtle understatement in the new film is definitely worthwhile. Is definitely worthwhile as an approach. So I'm wholly recommending Dune Part 2, but you probably need to go and watch Dune Part 1 and watch them back to back, which is an investment of about 5 hours. You will see various comments about the cinematography, the acting, the slightly non-linear or episodic storytelling, all of which are true. What I would say is it takes you on a wonderful story, even though the fundamental moral at the end is not really a great one. Paul Atreides may triumph. What has he become to achieve that victory?